Recording in progress.
All right, we are live.
Yate, everybody. Shio, hello, and a very warm welcome to the first presentation of our super fun speaker series, A Sense of Place, Indigenous Perspectives of Land, Water, and Sky. This series is hosted by the Indigenous Education Institute and supported by the National Institute of Health, Oregon State University's Superfund Research Program, OSU's Community Engagement Corps, and tribal partner Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. It is also supported by the University of New Mexico Superfund Medals Program. My name is Dr. Nancy Maryboy. I am Diné and Tsalagi, Navajo and Cherokee. My Cherokee name is Tsawayuga, and I am from the Cherokee Bird Clan. I'm also of the Deer Springs Clan and the Honeycomb Rock Cliff Dweller Clan of the Diné. I'm the founding president and executive director of the Indigenous Education Institute, which has been in existence for over 25 years. We are located in the San Juan Islands of Washington State and on the Navajo Nation. Over the past 3 years, we have presented 8 sessions of our original speaker series, featuring renowned Indigenous speakers from around the United States and Canada and the world. And now I'm honored and pleased to begin this new series focused on Indigenous people and the environments of Oregon, Washington, and Arizona, and New Mexico. I would like to begin today with a heartfelt acknowledgement of the Indigenous peoples of our Mother Earth to honor our many participants from around the world. Usually we acknowledge the land on which we are living or presenting, but in this day and age of virtual online realities and the pandemic of COVID-19, we wish to honor all Indigenous peoples around the world. I also want to acknowledge that I currently reside on the ancestral lands of the saltwater salmon people of the Salish Sea, who have called this place home since time immemorial. I honor the inherent and acquired treaty rights of these Indigenous peoples. The presentations in this series have been chosen to reflect an awareness of the foundations of traditional Indigenous thinking and living. In our native ways, everything is interconnected. So rather than a specific focus on biology, astronomy, or other separate disciplines, we will be presenting dynamic worlds of interrelationships and processes of reciprocity. An additional focus for this speaker series is expanding awareness and understanding for cultural differences and to support successful and diverse working relationships, whether it be in education, national resource management, NASA, museums, and science centers, or tribal communities. Today, we are honored to bring you Roberta Bobbie Connor, the director of Tomaslik Cultural Institute Museum, located on the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation near Pendleton, Oregon. I want to personally thank you for attending this webinar. The interest you have shown is truly heartwarming. We have over 425 people registered from all across the United States, and we have participants from around the world, including Canada, Mexico, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and even South Africa. It is also interesting and heartwarming for me that we have more than 85 different tribes represented in our registrations for this presentation today, and more than 125 Indigenous participants. Almost all our presentations for the Sense of Place, Indigenous Perspective on Land, Water, and Sky have been recorded and can be downloaded at the Indigenous Education Institute website shortly following each event. Since you all have registered by email, we will also share with you notices of upcoming sessions. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Sidel Harrison of Oregon State University. Sidel?
Thank you, Nancy. Good afternoon. My name is Sidel Harrison. My Indian name is Ipnamawa. I am of Cayuse, Walla Walla, and Yakima descent, and currently I am a PhD student in the College of Public Health and Human Sciences at Oregon State University. I've had the opportunity to apply my graduate training and skills through our Superfund research program here at OSU since 2016 in the Community Engagement Corps. With our partner tribes, we've been able to build a tribal student campus tour, various community-led environmental health research projects, and finally, this Sense of Place speaker series with Nancy. We're so grateful for Nancy and IEI for partnering on this first speaker. And I also want to thank Dr. Robin Tangway, OSU's Superfund Director and PI, SRP Core Leader, Dr. Molly Kyle, and our current SRP Community Engagement Core Leader, Dr. Diana Rollman, for their continued support in these projects. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Bobbie Connor. Bobbie is the director, like Nancy said, of Tomaslik Cultural Institute, a large tribally owned museum on the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation near Pendleton, Oregon. Bobbie is Cayuse, Umatilla, and Nez Perce, and a citizen of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. She graduated from Pendleton High School, go Bucks, the University of Oregon, and Willamette University's Graduate School of Management. She is a member of the Board of Directors of the National Museum of the American Indian and has served as the museum's chair. She was vice chair for the National Council of the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial, and she currently serves on the Board of Trustees of the Oregon Historical Society and other various boards. She has contributed to many other publications, including introduction to the commemorative edition of the Cayuse Indians, Imperial Tribesmen of Old Oregon. And now it's my pleasure to bring you Bobbie Connor.
Thank you, Sidel. Thank you, Nancy. It's my pleasure to be here. Niakamaitsky or Niakapachwai, good day. Shiakapachwai. I am in our people's homeland, and I'm going to go to a PowerPoint now and hope that all technology is with me today. So what you see is our tribal flag. And while the representation of government is not our goal today, it is important for me to let you know that the Confederacy is not one that is cultural, but has become embedded in our lives through the work of the United States government, who arranged this Confederacy for their own convenience in 1855 to dispossess us of our lands. So as we proceed today, I want to just thank the Confluence Project for what they are willing to do to help us make these points today. This is the homeland that we lived and traveled in, that you can see that goes a very great distance from the Columbia River and the Snake River. And the density, the data density that you see, it represents the heart of our homeland. For those of you unfamiliar with our geography, we're in the interior Pacific Northwest on the Columbia River Plateau. And the Columbia River is 1,243 miles long and is the 7th largest river in the United States. And its longest tributary, the Snake, is 1,078 miles. And so you can see that that goes, travels, the Snake tributary goes all the way into what is now Wyoming, into what is now Yellowstone National Park. Our people were, long before the arrival of explorers in this homeland, this expanse of land was known to plateau peoples. As you can well imagine, traveling the rivers and traveling the tributaries provided us, for thousands of years, provided us with intimate knowledge of this landscape. More recently, settler colonialism led to what we call divide and conquer tactics, deployed through the treaty-making process of the United States government, forcing us to declare what's mine, and then reinforcing that through a variety of other political and legislative processes. We belong to this land, and it is unfortunate that throughout our recent history, most people do not believe that we had a concept of property law, and this is simply not true. It does not exist in our mindsets the way Western law of property exists, but our very, 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 very long tenure here, our intimate knowledge of this landscape, its ecology, and our names, our Indigenous place names across the face of our homeland, are witness and evidence of our tenure and our ownership. Nami Ticham, our land, Nami Nishaich, our home, Nunimwatis, our land. This is the modern overlay of towns that you now see on the landscape. But once upon a time, not very long ago, this landscape had none of these names and only had Indigenous place names. To understand the complexity of our homeland, the heart of our homeland, you see the multiple tributaries and watersheds that took care of and sustained us. So what you see here is the little town of Pendleton, which is near where the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation is located. But our knowledge of this land involved all of these river basins, as well as the broader expanse I first showed you. We have been here since time immemorial, and that means that this is the cradle of our existence. This is the universe that embraces our fruitfulness, sustains us, and provides for us even in our most difficult times of survival. It's unfortunate that 100 plus years ago, this was still considered wilderness. Thomas Jefferson imagined an empty canvas in the West 200 plus years ago. Those notions are patently untrue. We live in a land that provides for us. The Creator put us here. Our elder brother, Nami Piap, or our maker, placed everything here. Everything that we also have responsibility of taking care of, because it takes care of us. And there is a covenant between our people and the place that we live that is inalienable, as long as we uphold our traditional laws.
All summer long, they would take off with their uncle and a father and a sister, and Elsie and Vera, and dogs, and a couple of dogs, and a cat. And the cat rode on my mother's saddle, and the dogs she made boxes for the dogs, and so they could travel and not get sore feet. And they would go to Hetner and start digging roots and dig house over there and go on into the mountains. And they'd stop at Sumter and trade for coffee and sugar. And they trade what they had made on the way and a dried deer tan hide, and made moccasins and gloves and things they could sell, trade for. And this was their life on the seasonal rounds. They collected all their food in the winter, summertime, and by the time they got to Vail and the Snake River, they dried on the fish, and they would come home with dried fish, dried deer meat, all kinds of roots and berries. And they would have all this food, and even though they had all this food, 12 horses packed up all this food, they would still take in people or relatives who didn't have a home. And they lived on this way all their lives. And it was beautiful how they took care of each other, and dogs survived, and the cat survived, and all the way from Hetland to Vail and back.
This land from whence we came is a gift. It is the nucleus of our universe. This does not change regardless of the jurisdictions that overlay it. This does not change regardless of the encroachments and the pollution and the changes to the landscape that have made dramatic alterations in not only the landscape, but our lives. This Blue Mountain homeland is our identity. It is what defines our people, and this land is from whence our culture emanates. For those of you who have ever walked the landscape in your homeland or in any place that you have resided, one of the things that you may have sensed is that you are not alone, that you are in the company of others. And in our homeland, there are land formations that are tied to important coyote stories about how the land was formed and shaped. But these are not tall tales. These are not mythology in the sense of fables. These are explanations for how this land came to be the way that it is. And when we live on this landscape in close concert with the land and all else that lives here, we have to be mindful that there are sentinels, that there are guardian watchers who are paying heed to not only what we do and how we live, but to the care of the land. And it is important always in our culture to remind ourselves that humans are not omnipotent. We are not in charge of the planet. The planet reminds us of that with catastrophic events occasionally, so that we can wake up and be reminded that Mother Nature is not at our disposal. These sentinels, these watchers, are with us all the time. They have been taking care of this land and us for time immemorial. These places that we go to be reminded of our humbleness are now called Elephant Rock, or the Cayuse Sisters, or Iskultpa, the place of the beheading. These important places in our landscape are symbolic of how our identity is tied to this land. Our sustenance is tied to this land in a way that we cannot separate from the way that we live. There are people who believe that because during the reservation era and the sociological and physical disruption caused by the reservation making process, that we ended up in abject poverty and we were forced to live this subsistence lifestyle. The subsistence lifestyle invokes the notions of survival every time we use that word. And I would suggest that that's inappropriate. This is a lifestyle that we have continued to follow, whether we could afford to buy groceries or not. Hunting, fishing, gathering, medicines and foods from the plant kingdom are all practices that we carry on regardless of our personal discretionary income. Not everyone in our tribe follows these practices, but those who do sustain this way of living so that it can be continued into the future. This way of living has sustained us for millennia, and embedded in this practice of hunting and fishing, gathering, is the relationship and the reverence and the respect that we have for this land. You cannot be one of these hunters and fishers and not understand how the landscape affects your life and how each of the days of your life are sustained by what the land that we live upon. One of the things that you may or may not be familiar with, in Oregon, the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla back in 2005 and 2006 challenged the acceptable level of toxicity, oxymoron. The acceptable level of toxicity, according to the Environmental Quality Department, was based on the average consumption of salmon in Oregon. Scientific study showed us that our people consume 20 to 25 times more salmon than the average Oregonian. Thus, the acceptable level of toxicity needed to be changed to protect our well-being and our health, because acceptable levels of toxicity did not take into account our heavy reliance on these foods that we gather ourselves that do not come through commercial processes. One of the things that this challenge with the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality taught us is that we can be radicals in the sense of creating change, but we have to do it within the systems that exist now that are intended to protect the landscape, but do not always protect our homeland. There are places that we can no longer go to get our foods. These places that we go have some recently have become more accessible by agreements with landowners and private corporations and individual holders, so that we can be where there are foods that grow that don't grow everywhere else, in special locations where we can get foods that we have not seen on our longhouse table for a very long time. So access and jurisdiction have a lot to do with that ability to sustain ourselves. Our relationship with nature is tied into all of the creative processes of our people. You see this quail topknot or quail plume reflected in this woven hemp and corn husk root bag. This is a reflection of the natural world around us, and the fibers that are provided to make this container are natural as well. Even though we know that there are scientific names for all of these plants and animals, even though we know that they can be cataloged in Western science according to the taxonomy that has been created and been sort of gifted to us since Lewis and Clark's arrival and record keeping began in our homeland in 1805 and 1806. It's important for us to keep the names of these plants alive. We believe that the land hears our prayers, feels our footprints, hears our songs. We know that these animals and plants speak their own names in the process of telling us about their lives and teaching us. The natural world is as much an educator to us as we are to our children. This natural landscape that has sustained us, that has taken care of us, has informed how we have existed on this land for millennia. It is longitudinal. It is important to understand that as we look at the soil compositions in our homeland, there are very special compositions that make these foods sustainable and harvestable. Herbicides and pesticides have a consequence of polluting us. And that is unfortunate because the protections that are provided have favored the corporate farming and agricultural communities over the individual harvest by families of these foods. Whether it's the balsam root sunflower that you see from Northern California to British Columbia in April, or the pronghorn antelope that was eradicated or extirpated from our homeland, these plants and animals belong here. And that brings me back to our sense of belonging. Our ability to exist in this landscape has not been precarious. It has been ordered. It has had little chaos, and it has been reliable for almost all of our history. It's only in the last couple hundred years that the disruption has been overt, covert, and wholesale in attacks on our ability to take care of ourselves through the natural world. And one of the things that we hope that people will begin to understand is that ours is a living culture. So when you work with tribal people, it's important to understand they may not be trusting. We have suffered enough injustice and exploitation and had much of our culture in an intellectual property appropriated from our communities and used not only against us in court, but used to help others make money in their way of life in sort of what we call new age practices of teaching about the planet. This landscape, these relatives, the eagle, the couch, they are our kin. So all of the fishes and the meats are brothers. All of the roots and berries are sisters. This kinship system overlies all of our culture. And when you go to conduct research with what have historically been called informants, tribal informants, you need to be mindful that 200 years has taught us that being good people and operating in good faith has not always served us well. So as we look at the intersection of science and traditional culture, what we find is that respect is the core foundation of the relationship. Not just respect for the individual sitting in front of you or on the other end of the line, but respect for all of the landscape, respect for all of the ecology, respect for the rocks, as well as the water that gives life. This fundamental expectation of respect is so critical to working well in Indian country. I would suggest it would be wise to test your methodologies in conversation, your methodologies in interview with people who are aware of how we work. You should be mindful that many of us have research protocols and research permissions enacted in code and in practice on our reservations and in our homelands. Permissions are required to conduct such research. It is not a wilderness. It is not a freewheeling opportunity to experiment. And we are not afraid of science. we have our own science. It's important to remember that we've been here so very long that our languages have embedded in them ecological knowledge. Our place names represent stories of myth time, stories of the Missoula floods, stories of how plants came to be here and how they have relationships among themselves. It is without reservation that I suggest that as you think about making inquiries into the way traditional ecological knowledge is employed, you be mindful that you do not come to the equation knowing most of the answers. If you are asking us questions, we will presume you want to know the answers. But if you interject and frame and overlay your thinking into what you're asking us to describe to you, you will not learn very much. It's quite simply a filter that you're operating through that will not allow you to recognize the filter through which we work, the perspective that we provide. They can work together. They can make a tremendous difference in the future we all have together on this planet. We have the opportunity to work collaboratively. I am really proud to say that the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla has its Natural Resources Director, Eric Quimps, who has instituted first foods management practices into the management of his department. It is not a surprise that we are going back to our own beginnings because the planet is in trouble.
I have a respect for the land, that this is your home forever. This is what's going to take care of you. This 512,000 acres is your home. It's your economy. It's where all the water and the fish and the drinking and the housing and the trees and the roots and berries and the fruit, and it's all in there for you to make a living. And in that instance, it'll require a lot of travel to make that happen, and that's what they do. And that's a nation. That's a people. But when invasion comes in, that disrupts all that, and somebody else takes over. But there's still fighting going on in the end. And then we get to where we're at today. We fought all these wars, Indian wars, Europe and Korea, and the tribes are up there fighting the same war for freedom, for respect, and then come home in the same way with other soldiers and that have been out there fighting for this land, for this freedom, so that they could have a place to live, and then being able to do that, but better understanding who we are, better understanding who the natives are here, and what their rights are here, and respecting that. Learning that and respecting it. That's why I think the teachers are so important. They're the education part of it. And it's these little guys that are growing up that are going to understand that, because that's their education. That's where they come from. And then they'll start walking that talk.
I want to thank the Confluence Project for sharing those outtakes with me, those excerpts from their work on the Columbia River and with Columbia River tribes. Ours is a living culture, whether it's tamarack for teepee poles, or whether it's dog bane being harvested for hemp, for weaving materials and containers, whether it's our ability to have fun and play stick game, whether it's our ability to be astute observers of the natural order and astute observers of the faces of others against whom we're gambling. We have been on this landscape a very long time, paying very close attention. And our ability to read the land, to read the tell, to know that we have challenges ahead, tells us that we are at risk. And the risks that face our people, whether it's drought, extreme catastrophic fire, overheating the planet, whatever the changes are that are coming, we know more changes coming. We have endured very difficult changes in our lives. And one of the things that you will see is that we have to change the way we live. This is the Umatilla River, a road on the Umatilla River, or what used to be a road. This is the flooding that occurred in 2019, immediately prior to the pandemic hitting the planet and the United States. This, the tribe's first director of natural resources, a man by the name of Michael Jughead Farrow, envisioned roads and railroads being out of river bottoms. That's a long-term vision. But it looks like from this photograph, it would be the right thing to do. We have insisted that we can get in the way of nature and we can be preeminent as humans. We are not. We keep having to be reminded of that. Our tribes today, many people across the planet, are working to tie our surface water, including reintroduced meandering streams, back to the aquifer. That's just one of many, many, many objectives in each of the watersheds that are critical to our homeland. It is not this kind of catastrophe that tells us that's necessary. We've known that it is necessary. This is just another signal. This is just another suggestion from Mother Earth that we might want to do things differently. It is not good for us to have radioactive food. It is not healthy for us to eat the pollutants that we apply across the planet. It is not good for us to raise our children where they have higher degrees of exposure to burn from the sun than they've ever had before. As we think about this, one of the things that I think is so critical that people tend to underestimate is that we have been here on this landscape for all of our existence, and we expect to be here for all of our time on Earth, generation after generation. As our colleague and good friend Gabe Shuships at the Friends of Tryon Creek says, he's a 500th generation Oregonian, not a 5th or 6th generation farmer or rancher, 500 generations. That's impressive by itself that we have been here that long. What would be more impressive is that we can live here another 500 generations. I thank you for your kind attention, and I'm going to share with you now a bibliography of some materials about our people. This is a brief bibliography. I'll just apologize in advance that a few of these books are out of print, but they are certainly available as used books from your nearest online supplier. The Theodore Stern books, Chiefs and Change and Chiefs and Chief Trader, are almost completely encyclopedic in their coverage of the arrival of trappers and traders in our homeland and the impacts leading right up to the Treaty of 1855. You can see that our tribe has a dictionary in Umatilla. We also rely on Haru Aoki's Nez Perce work from the University of California at Berkeley for the Nez Perce dictionary that he compiled. And the Umatilla dictionary is available online through the help of Google. You can actually go to the online dictionary to look up what we call a bull elk. Sidel mentioned the Cayuse Indians in her opening remarks. This is a book that we reintroduced in 2005 because we wanted people to not only have the excerpts of our treaty articles, but the full transcript of the treaty proceeding and the things that our people, our headmen said, representing our people in that treaty process, which talks about this land that sustains us and the idea that it could be cut up like a piece of buckskin and parceled out and owned and traded, which was inconceivable to us at the time. You also see a couple of things that we've published, our tribal history book, and you see the atlas that from which much of the material that I talked about, including that list of scientific names, that excerpt comes from, and this was published in 2015. So with that, Sidel and Nancy, I'll conclude my remarks.
Great. Thank you so much, Bobbie. For those folks asking in the chat, I did post a link. Lindsay helped me get a link to your bibliography that should be there now. You should be able to click through to that Google Doc to find those. We did have a couple of questions that came in, and since we have a few more minutes here toward the end, I have a couple here for you. The first one is, does Tumutlik Cultural Institute have any curriculum materials available online or otherwise?
So we have collaborated with others, including Whitman College, to create curriculum, for example, for the Nehiawe Community School, using As Days Go By, our tribal history book. We have collaborated with others over time on curriculum projects, including the Whitman Mission National Historical Site. And right now, we are updating our website. We will be launching a new website in the coming months, and that will have a new education tab that will have a lot of digital content embedded in it, but does not have specific curriculum units for all of K through 12. We are working with the Tribal Education Department, who is working on more curriculum units. The state of Oregon, through Senate Bill 13, has required that knowledge of tribes and the history of tribal peoples in Oregon be included, and that work continues. And we are doing, the Oregon Historical Society and many others are advancing that work. I should also mention that if you're at all connected with the National Museum of the American Indians website, a Smithsonian institution, their 360 educational unit has a lot of material available as well.
Yes, thank you for that. I have been on their 360 page, and it really does have a lot of information, so thank you for that. The second question we had, which is kind of a fun one, is do you have any comments to share about creation stories of the local tribes in the Columbia Basin?
It's an interesting question we've been asked many times by including Smithsonian writers. So we have origin stories about how the various peoples came to be in the locations that they are. One of them is the Heart of the Monster story that comes from what is now considered Idaho in the Nez Perce territory. And that Heart of the Monster story is similar to a creation or origin story that talks about our people being saved from Naishla, the swallowing monster. We have lots of monsters in our culture. They help children behave. And so Naishla is swallowing all of the plants and all of the animals and all of the fishes and meats, and they are all in his belly. And Coyote has to help them escape so that they can take care of the Natitalwit, the people who are coming. Hipino and Natitalwit, the people are coming. And so one of those stories of how we came to be the way we are in the places that we are is the Heart of the Monster story. That story is told here in the Coyote Theater at Temeslik, and it's told in many publications of oral histories of Nez Perce or Nimipu culture. The other thing I want to just mention is that we believe in the plateau that we come from this land, that we emerged from the earth, that this is not a story of traveling across a Bering Strait. And one of the things that when you look at the period of time that we've been here for 12 to 16,000 years, there is no other history of any other place than this. One of the things that we have been told by the linguists who worked with our elders for decades is that there is an analysis of the languages, that if there is a migration story, that it supports a south to north migration, not across the Bering Strait, but on this continent, that would tie us between 2,000 and 6,000 years ago to the Uto-Aztecan or Great Basin cultures back then. Our languages are very much different now, but there are linguistic suggestions that we are related to the Great Basins people through our speech patterns. So there's a lot of theory, but our people come from this place. We come from the earth on which we live.
Thank you for that. And definitely linguistics is fascinating in that way. I want to say that possibly in the museum that there are Coyote storybooks also.
Yes.
Okay. So that might be another place to look. I personally remember visiting my grandmother, and she had tapes of them. So listening to them on tapes when people used to listen to tapes. Do you have anything final that you would like to share or say here? For example, maybe what exhibit is at Temeslik right now?
Right now, we're featuring an exhibit in our temporary gallery on bison. Bison is one of our food sources. People may not be aware that even before the modern horse returned to North America, about 1700, between 1680 and 1700 in our area, that we used to go on foot in multi-tribal pilgrimages to what is now the Yellowstone area for bison hunting. And bison hides have long been prized by our people, as well as horns, as well as other materials from the bison body. And so that is in our temporary gallery right now. I will just also mention that next year in 2023, Temeslik turns 25. So we've been around a little bit longer than I can believe. I've been in this job a little over 24 years. So it's exciting to come up on that anniversary. And one of the things that will be happening throughout 2023 is that we will be refreshing all of our permanent exhibits and making changes. Now that won't stop in 2023. We'll continue in 24 and 25 to upgrade the permanent exhibits. But we will be engaged in multiple projects in multiple zones of the museum and the landscape to give you a new reason to visit Temeslik.
That's so exciting. It's always sort of every year or so we like to bring the kids up there. So I'm excited for that. I want to just personally say thank you, Bobbie, for your time today. I enjoyed your talk. We're going to try to capture as much from the comments to share afterwards, so we can share what everyone had to say in the Q&A. And then I'm just going to turn it over for closing remarks from Nancy.
Thank you, Sidel. And thank you, Bobbie. I cannot thank you enough. This was such a powerful presentation. And I know it really impacted a lot of the participants, because I've been reading some of the chats as they come through, and that idea of power and authenticity and belongingness has really captivated our participants. So I thank you so much. I also want to just say, if any of you have not been to the Tomaslik Museum, it is a stunning museum. It's one of my very favorites in the world. And just stepping in, and the way you're embraced by the culture and the land and the sounds when you start going through the exhibits is remarkable. And so I just want to encourage everybody that gets a chance to visit. It's near Pendleton, Oregon, and it's tremendous, I have to say. I also, so thank you for taking the time to talk to us and our audience. And I want to say that a lot of these are all being recorded, and so that your remarks are going to have a life of their own. People will go to our website and download it. And we have people, like one example is the author Robin Kimmerer. She was one of our early speakers in this series, and she uses these recordings in her own classes that she's teaching. So we see them scattered all across the country. People are using this, utilizing this as a resource for courses and students. And so this is not just a one-shot affair. This is going to have a life of its own. So thank you so much for your talk today. Our website is indigenouseducation.org/multimedia/, and Chris will post that. And if you go to that, you've probably been there because you've signed up for the series. You will be able to download this talk and some of the others that we have sponsored. There's no cost to download them, and we encourage you to do this and listen to it several times over and over. I also want to introduce or thank, I think, Diana Rollman, whose picture I think you've seen on the screen, who is the head of the Superfund this portion, as Sidel explained it better than I can, of this group at Oregon State that's doing such incredible work partnering with the Umatilla tribe. And I want to also thank Johnny Lewis, who I see came on and left a beautiful comment, if you get a chance to see it in the chat, who was is the head of the Superfund at the University of New Mexico. And it's partly due to these two women, that we are able to host this series. And we send a lot of grateful thanks to both of you, Diana and Johnny. We're planning to have another speaker from the University of New Mexico side in a few months, and then we will continue on with another one from Oregon State. I won't tell you who it is yet because it hasn't been totally confirmed. It'll be a great surprise because we think it's going to be a great talk. In closing, I want to extend a very special thank you to our technical support person, Chris Tarrant, who you see on this 360-degree. You can tell he's a professional photography. So you've been seeing his picture on the screen, of Terran Solutions from Friday Harbor, Washington. And each time we host one of these speakers, there's so much work that goes on behind the scenes, and we depend on Chris so very much for this. I want to say, because because Bobbie was talking about Coyote. Coyote has played a big part in this series. The first one we had with Leroy Little Bear from Canada was totally disrupted by the coyote. And luckily Chris had a plan B, so we were able to continue. But there's always that coyote factor, which in our Navajo culture, he's a disruptor and a bringer of chaos. But it also at the same time, chaos, it's also a symbol of everything coming together too, and teaching occurring. We will send out a short email to you just after we close this presentation, asking a reaction to what you have heard today. And we really hope you'll take time to answer these questions, because we use it to inform our future program design. So in closing, from all of us to all of you, thank you, Wado and Ahiehe, to you for being with us today, and we wish you a happy Thanksgiving. Thank you.
Kaitsiaya.
Yay.